More than 50 years have passed since man first went into outer space at an altitude of about 300 kilometers above the Earth, and since then dozens of cosmonauts have not only repeated this achievement but even landed on the Moon, and at this time here on Earth there is the deepest point to the bottom of which only 3 managed to descend. This is the least studied place on Earth around which there are many mysteries. The Mariana Trench. In this video we will not scare you with mysterious stories associated with creepy creatures supposedly living at the bottom of the trenches and speculating whether Megalodon is hiding there from people and so on. We believe that even without all this it is a very amazing place capable of telling a lot of interesting things. An underwater trench was discovered by the British research ship Challenger during the first global one. An oceanographic expedition at the same time discovered the deepest point of the trench without a Challenger. The Mariana Trench is not a vertical abyss. It is a crescent-shaped trench stretching for 2,500 kilometers east of the Philippines and west of the island of Guam, a bottom area of 400,000 square kilometers, and here Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia and etc. could easily be accommodated here. Estonia and even a place will remain for some Cyprus in 1875. Scientists tried to measure the depth of the Challenger abyss. The heat there with a rope with a load tied to it and a meter marking of the rope was only enough for 4,475 fathoms, which is 8,367 meters. After almost 100 years, the ship Challenger 2 returned here with an echo sounder and established the current depth value of 11 kilometers from the surface of the Pacific Ocean. In order to understand the depth and present the dimensions for comparison, we will give the famous example of Everest at the highest point of our planet. 2,100 meters would not be enough to sea level if it were at the bottom of the trenches, and the Mariana Trench, as the trench is also commonly called, is part of the global network of troughs crossing the seabed and formed as a result of ancient geological events, the Mariana Trench. The depressions are hidden in eternal darkness. The sun's rays do not penetrate to such a depth. The temperature is only a few degrees above zero and close to the freezing point. The pressure in the Challenger abyss is 108.6 megapascals, which is about 1072 times the normal atmospheric pressure at the level of the world's oceans, which is 5 times the pressure that it is created by the impact of a bullet and a bulletproof object and is approximately equal to the pressure inside the reactor for the synthesis of polyethylene. Such pressure will simply crush a person and the metal bends from it, which is why it is so difficult to get here to the bottom, and only 3 people were able to go down, including the famous director James Cameron. By the way, I recently read an article in which it was reported that in 2020 an American company will conduct excursions to the Mariana Trench to release tourists to a depth of about 10 kilometers. Is such a pleasure. However, $750,000. Bob, you and I can't afford such entertainment, so let's return to the topic. Because of such colossal pressure, the bottom of the Mariana Trench is covered with mucus and mud. There is no sand there. There are mainly remains of shells and ancient plankton. As for living creatures, among a fairly large variety, which is surprising for such and such. Of particular interest to science in the depths are the giant 10-centimeter amoebas called Casinophyiophore, and these organisms demonstrate amazing resistance to several elements and chemicals such as mercury, uranium and lead. In general, those elements that would kill other animals or humans in just a few minutes. There are probably many more species at the bottom awaiting discovery. In addition, it is still not clear how such microorganisms exist. Extremophiles can survive in such extreme conditions. The answer to this question will lead to a breakthrough in biomedicine and biotechnology. In the end, it will help to understand how life originated on Earth. It's quite possible that you already know all this information because there are plenty of videos on the topic, but we needed to talk about it briefly. We refreshed your memory, and if you've watched up to this point and you're still interested, let's do it. Let's move on to the main part. What is at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? Real mysteries of nature are hidden here, but first a small request: put a like under this video right now so that you don't forget to do it later. The Mariana Trench owes its enormous depth to the fault of 2 tectonic plates, the Pacific and Philippine. There are quite a lot of lithospheric plates on Earth. They are divided into 3 categories: the main, medium and small. These 2 plates that we are talking about belong to the first category, and at the same time the larger Pacific one goes under the Philippine one, forming a deep trench. Such regions in which similar geological events occurred are called subduction zones. Tectonic or lithospheric plates are the outer layer of our planet, the same layer on which we walk. This layer is created from broken fragments, like the shell of a broken egg. Such fragments of tectonic plates are in constant motion even if the speed is low, only a few centimeters per year. While in such motion, sometimes they unite and form a supercontinent that remains intact for several hundred million years and then falls apart again. Then these fragments mix and move away from each other, but in the end, after another 400 and 600 million years, they are destined again. The last of these supercontinents to connect was Pangaea. It was formed approximately 310 million years ago, and 180 million years ago it began to break up. It is estimated that the next supercontinent will form in 200 to 250 million years. That is, today we are halfway through this eternal cycle. However, this is a topic for another issue. If you are interested, let me know in the comments, but for now we have the Pacific and Philippine plates. The thickness of each of these plates that form the Mariana Trench is almost 100 kilometers, and the depth of the fault is at least 700 kilometers from the lowest point of the Challenger abyss. Imagine as if it were an iceberg. Man was not even on the top. Number 11 is nothing compared to number 700, hiding at a depth. Scientists suggest that through the subduction zone into the Earth's mantle, water enters large volumes of rocks at the boundaries of the faults, act like sponges absorbing. Water is transported into the bowels of the planet. As a result, the substance ends up at a depth of 20 to 100 kilometers below the seabed. Surprisingly, over the last million years, more than 79 million tons of water have entered the bowels of the Earth through this junction. This estimate was given by geologists from the University of Washington. Where does the Mariana Trench come from? But the more important question is what is happening. With water in the depths, it is believed that volcanoes close the introductory cycle by returning water to the atmosphere in the form of water vapor during eruptions. This theory was confirmed by previous measurements of the volumes of water penetrating into the mantle. Volcanoes emitted into the atmosphere approximately equal to the volume absorbed. However, new calculations indicate that the Earth absorbs more water than it returns, and this is a really strange condition. That the level of the world's oceans over the past few hundred years not only has not decreased, but has also increased by several centimeters. It is likely that the conditions in the Mariansky Trench are more extreme than in other parts of the planet, and through the fault in the Challenger abyss more water penetrates into the depths. Does the amount of water depend on the structural features of the subduction zone, for example, on the angle of bending of the plates? Scientists assume that similar faults exist. They exist in Alaska and Latin America, but so far man has not been able to discover a deeper structure than the Mariana Trench. Today this is a mystery that scientists have yet to solve, but the water hiding in the bowels of the Earth is not the last mystery of the Mariana Trench. This is the only place on the planet where carbon dioxide exists in liquid form. It is emitted by several underwater volcanoes located outside. In the Okinawa Trough near Taiwan at a depth of 414 meters in the Mariana Trench there is the Daikoku volcano, which is a lake of pure sulfur in liquid form that constantly boils at a temperature of 187 degrees Celsius. 6 kilometers below there are geothermal springs emitting into the water at a temperature of 450 degrees Celsius. But this water does not boil. The process is hampered by the pressure exerted by a 6.5 kilometer water column. The ocean floor of the Mariana Trench today has been studied by humans less than long. Probably someday scientists will be able to discover faults deeper than the Challenger abyss, or at least explore its structure and features. But for now the ocean reliably and carefully keeps its secrets. Modern films make us believe that the prehistoric Megalodon shark is a terrible monster more than 30 meters long, capable of biting an entire ship in two. From time to time, sensational videos appear here on YouTube in which it is stated that this monster is still there. It exists among us, despite the fact that it has definitely been extinct for a long time and brazenly appropriated the entire Mariana Trench for its home. However, recent studies have shed some light on how massive and huge Hollywood's favorite shark really was. So let's find out and at the same time speculate whether the Earth will ever be able to see such a powerful sea hunter again. We can judge the size of the Megalodon mainly by the massive jaws that have been discovered over the entire time. They are really impressive in size. By looking at them the Tyrannosaurus himself would be embarrassed. Why? Only the jaws have survived to this day because the skeletons of the shark are mainly composed of cartilage, a material that is very unstable over time. This means that the only parts of the shark that are stone or are the teeth and the bone jaw. The fossilized teeth of the Megalodon are very similar to another deadly predator living today, the great white shark. These teeth are several times larger than those of a modern predator, but in shape they are very similar. For many years, paleontologists assumed that white sharks were close relatives Megalodon and were therefore simply a slightly smaller version of one of them. If we use the great white shark as a guide to determine the length and weight of the Megalodon, then we will get a creature measuring 25 to 30 meters and an estimated mass of more than 70 tons. A predator of this size is approaching the size of the modern blue whale, which, as we know, is the largest animal on Earth. However, animals such as white sharks need a lot of food to continue to exist, because then the ocean could. Providing food for such a huge creature has led many scientists to doubt that Megalodon is the ancestor of the great white shark, but then a breakthrough occurred. Megalodon's teeth have several features on the sides of the blade that resemble a completely different, much more ancient lineage of sharks. Instead of being placed in the same mouth as the white shark known as Carcharodon, it was modified and placed in the Ododontid group. Unless you are a paleontologist, these features are really hard to see. Uvatodontid Dave. There are several blades per tooth with small blades on the outside. Megalodon teeth have small details on the lower edges of the giant teeth that resemble the very small additional teeth that Plotodontae had. Using the trends observed in the remains of this entire group, as well as other groups closer to them than Carcharodon, scientists managed to reconstruct the Megalodon with greater accuracy. The result is no longer a 30-meter horror of depth. Instead, we get adult individuals about 16 meters long. In front of you, the image demonstrating the recreated sizes of the Megalodon and represent adult individuals of both. The essay of the young shark in the image above demonstrates all the proportions estimated by scientists. This is one of the most in-depth studies to recreate not only the length but also the shape of this shark, and in the end we see a creature created more for strength than for speed. The mass of the Megalodon is a little more difficult to estimate since there are simply no living Ododontid Dav. This means that we cannot see how dense their muscles were and how physically strongly it was built, so estimates vary greatly from 12 to 33 tons. All this makes the Megalodon very similar in size to the average sperm whale, with the only difference being Megalodon most likely weighed less than an adult sperm whale. They weigh about 57 tons. This is not surprising since a whale has a strong bone skeleton and a shark consists mainly of cartilage, but could a Megalodon survive to this day, living in this mysterious Mariana Trench? Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, but no, many people know that the last Megalodons were destroyed by Jason Statham, and with almost his bare hands. But seriously, he had it to live in our oceans. There is simply no suitable food. The time in which Megalodon lived was a very interesting period for the oceans, which were much richer marine life than today, with more species of medium-sized whales. Such whales were hunted by Megalodons, for example the Balayan sand, resembling a very small blue whale, but unlike the blue whale it was only 5 meters in length. There were many species of whales of this size on the globe, and most of the fossils that have survived to this day were found to have bite marks on the bones that correspond to giant teeth. Blinking he of if ancient whales were the same size like today, it would take them so long to reach maturity that a Megalodon would eat them before they could will begin to reproduce. This meant that the behavior of the Megalodon directly affected the size of the whales, which also had a plentiful diet, and therefore there were many different species of whales all over the world to help support the life of such a massive shark as the Megalodon. Why is the size of the whales so important for the existence of the Megalodon? Yes, simply if the Megalodon were alive today, it would deplete their population so quickly that it would probably die of starvation. So today in our oceans there simply is not enough suitable food for such an impressive sharks. However, the great white shark is growing faster than its modern counterparts, relatives, and even larger than them. Maybe in the future it will turn into a new Megalodon. So once again, fortunately or unfortunately not, our friends the whales have something to say here, because the Megalodon may not have been the top sea predator as we think. By the way, like white sharks now, the true rulers of the seas have long been the whales. One species of whale that lived together with the Megalodon even put its famous jaws to shame. They call it Leviathan, is a relative of the sperm whale, which had the largest functional teeth among of all the animals. His skull was 3 meters long, with teeth 36 centimeters long and 11 centimeters in diameter. These teeth are more than twice the size of Megalodon's. Given the strength of these teeth and a strong skull, it is likely that the Leviathan had greater strength and bite than a moment. Although no thorough studies have been carried out to calculate the strength of these incredible teeth, the Leviathan was probably the same length as the Megalodon, 16 meters. With the same dimensions but with a higher metabolism, it was endothermic, anime for thermal, and Probably a higher intelligence with such indicators. It is difficult to imagine the Megalodon as the undisputed king of the seas of those ancient times. Since the whales entered the water, they challenged the sharks. The home of the Megalodons and Leviathans was the infamous Basilosaurus, also 16 meters long, were its relatives. Only when these serpentine whales became extinct, Megalodon appeared in the fossil record, occupying part of the niche of giant predators which Basilosaurus occupied before this. Approximately the same thing is happening today, but now the sharks are being challenged by killer whales. It has been repeatedly observed that great white sharks swim away from killer whales. It even happened that killer whales hunted, killed and ate adult white sharks. More terrifying were reports that killer whales destroyed sperm whales, and here a rhetorical question arises. Could such predators kill a megalodon? So it is unlikely that in the future we will see another shark similar to the megalodon. Killer whales are more numerous, more powerful. They are smarter than any modern sharks in. Currently, there are about 50,000 killer whales on the globe, and although these populations are under threat due to certain great apes that are for the sake of money is mercilessly exterminated by them, killer whales are still more numerous than white sharks. There are only 35,000 left in the oceans. Who knows, evolution may give us killer whales the size of sperm whales, capable of killing even larger prey, but it is more likely that killer whales will continue the trend of being extremely adaptable. My hunters with one of the sharpest minds in the animal world, because this is what makes them the top predators of the oceans today. Subscribe to the channel, it is interesting, and click on the bell so as not to miss anything until new interesting meetings are located in the South Pacific Ocean. One of the most interesting places on our planet. It is located at a distance of about 5,000 kilometers from the east coast of New Zealand, and its depth exceeds 3 kilometers. To get to the nearest piece of land you will have to overcome as many as 2,688 kilometers. This is the farthest from any human civilization on Earth. The oceanic pole of inaccessibility, or Nemo Geese Atoll, uninhabited tiny-sized island belonging to the oceanic volcanic ridge. Pitcairn is located to the north of the point of it and is a strip of land in the shape of the letter S. This is a deserted, windy place where there are barely a few kilometers of surface. Its area is only 7/10 of square kilometers. There are practically no ships in this place, only research ones. Western point of the state of Chile in South America. It is the top of a mountain with its foot sticking out from the ocean, located at a depth of more than 2,000 meters below sea level. In the south there is another neighbor of the point, the island of Mohair. It is also small in shape, similar to a horseshoe, located 13 kilometers from the larger island. It was believed that off the coast of the land of the Maori bird in Antarctica. Thus only 3 small islands are considered the closest to the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. If you somehow miraculously manage to get here, the closest neighbors within a radius of 2,688 kilometers, there will be only birds and penguins. The ocean here is completely different. Rapid flows of water of different sizes of ocean currents powerfully rush here from different directions and gather at one point, colliding and twisting. They form the South Pacific Gyre, the center of which is called the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. The area is absolutely deserted. There are practically no representatives of the fauna, fish or birds. Days of mammals. The strongest currents allow only bacteria to survive. Sea traffic in the southern region of the Pacific Ocean is negligible. The desolation of the region and the absence of valuable or unique living organisms in the depths led to the decision to build a cemetery for spaceships at the point. Since 1971, more than 263 spacecraft have crashed here. It is here that the Russian orbital station Mir found its final refuge, which is also the most massive of those that rests at the bottom of the Nemo's Point. The impressive remains of the 143-ton massive orbital station were thrown out by the waves to the beaches of the Fiji archipelago. The main part sank in the depths of the ocean, so that to bury the next spacecraft in this cemetery, the space agency requires some time to carry out the necessary calculations. As a rule, more compact satellites do not end their lives exactly at our point, and explains this by creating so much heat by atmospheric friction, which largely destroys the satellites, feeding at a speed of several thousand kilometers per hour even before it falls. Spacecraft do not retain their structure after re-entering the atmosphere. Most of them completely burn up. They are preserved and only fall to the ground. Fuel tanks and massive elements of rocket engines. But a completely different matter are larger objects like the Tianlong 11 Chinese orbital space station launched in September 2011, which weighed about 8.5 tons. China lost control of the 12-meter orbital laboratory in March 2016. You probably remember this story when the media and scarecrow with the station falling right on people. Fortunately, everything worked out. In 2018, Taigun alone entered the Earth's atmosphere in the central part of the southern half of the Pacific Ocean, and most of the station burned up in the atmosphere. It also happens that engineers lose contact with them and can no longer determine the course of the ship, so not all spacecraft rest at Point Nemo. For example, in 1991, the Soviet space station Salyut 7 crashed in South Africa, and in 1971, the NASA orbital station Skylab fell on the territory of Australia. And even if not all spacecraft end their lives in this cemetery of space technology, however, the chances are that some collapsing spacecraft will fall on one of the people, regardless of where this spacecraft will fall to the ground. According to the calculations of researchers, our chances are very small that someone can get hurt, as if people or representatives of marine fauna make up only 100,000%, and the last case that comes to mind happened already in 1997. Then in Oklahoma, a woman fell before the burning part of the rocket. There is also such a photo on the internet, by the way. Do you think the woman was lucky or not? Very likely that soon the International Space Station ISS will end up here in this graveyard of spaceships in 2024. Its service life will end, although it may be cursed, until 2030. By the way, Nemo is so isolated from humanity that the nearest settlements to it are precisely the ISS astronaut, and those living on it are located at a distance of about 400 kilometers from the Earth, while the closest piece of land to Point Nemo, as we have already found out, is located in Asda. Further paradox, isn't it true? Of course, there will be environmentalists who will say that this is wrong, and in general you can endlessly argue about the threat of ocean pollution, but a much greater danger is dead space. The device can create an orbit at the moment. At various altitudes, there are about 4,000 artificial satellites circling the Earth, and in the near future even more should appear according to the statistics of the site spacetrack.org. In addition to satellites in orbit, there are thousands of uncontrolled remains of rockets, as well as more than 12,000 other artificial objects larger than a human fist. And this is if we also omit the countless number of different screws, bolts, pieces, dried paint from the skin of rockets, and many metal particles. If we talk about the mass of all these objects, it turns out that there are now about 8,000 metric tons of man-made materials in the orbit of the Earth. The worst, according to experts from the same European Space Agency, can happen when two pieces of space debris collide with each other, especially when these objects are large in size. Accidental collisions of the same satellites occur very rarely, but still the last one occurs. Such incidents were in 1996, 2009, barely in 2013 as a result of similar events, and also as a result of the deliberate destruction of satellites appears. A huge amount of space debris poses a threat to other working satellites and the danger of a chain effect. Such debris can remain in orbit for hundreds and even thousands of years. To prevent the emergence of new space debris, aging spacecraft need to be removed from orbit over time. Many space agencies as well as private space companies are now considering the possibility of creating a special scavenger apparatus that could capture obsolete satellites and other spacecraft and send them straight to the underwater spaceship cemetery. Others propose to burn this debris with lasers, but the problem is that these objects do not just hang in orbit, they move at a very high speed of about 7 kilometers per second. Of course, this seriously complicates the task of catching them. However, unfortunately, such technical difficulties in the implementation of such plans are far from being in the first place among the problems when there is such a thing as bureaucracy. Technical difficulties here are far from the most important. The main problem here is created by the idea. Private property, for example, no other nation has the right to touch the same Russian satellite except Russia itself. If something like this happens and it can be calculated as an act of military aggression, the irony is that we continue and will continue to contribute to replenishing the space dump. Although we ourselves are thinking about how to get rid of it, it is necessary to find a solution to this problem, and it is better to do it earlier, otherwise then it may be too late. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Press the bell in order not to miss anything. And until new interesting meetings in the lowland tropics of northern Colombia, 96 kilometers from the coast of the Caribbean Sea, there is a gray, empty, impregnable and seemingly endless horizon in a dusty outback devoid of vegetation and, for the reason, dirt roads. Today it is one of the largest coal companies in the world, covering an area of a large city and employing about 10,000 workers, but approximately 58 million years ago, just a few million years after the disappearance of dinosaurs in the series, it was a huge swampy jungle. the temperature here was much higher and the climate was wetter. The trees had wider leaves, indicating a large amount of rainfall, at least twice as much as now. Deep rivers flowing in the northern parts swirled around hardwood palms, rare tussocks of earth and rotting vegetation, mud and we periodically covered and compressed dead leaves, branches and animal carcasses in layers tens of centimeters thick. It is not surprising that in series it is today one of the richest and most important mineral deposits in world, providing scientists with a unique imprint of the geological process. When the dinosaurs had just disappeared and a new habitat appeared in the river basin, there lived turtles with shells twice the size of sewer manholes, crocodiles of at least 3 different species over 3.5 meters long, and many other ancestors of modern animals and fish. Naturally, such rich lands must have an owner, and he was here. In this jungle lived a truly impressive creature, a snake over 14 meters in diameter, about a meter and weighing more than a ton. It was a very formidable predator, the ability to eat any animal that came into Simon's eyes. This is a titanoboa. However, until relatively recently, absolutely no one had any idea about the existence of this monster, which was born by the Poly father. Small fragments of bone were found, but in order to confidently talk about a prehistoric animal, its characteristics, how it lived, what it ate, and so on, its complete skeleton is needed, and even more importantly, the skull of snakes is made of several thin bones that are not very well fused. However, when an animal dies, the skull falls apart and the bones are lost. Finding a surviving skull is a real blessing for paleontologists, and in this regard, a Smithsonian intern named Jorge Marina Bernal was very lucky, who immediately invited paleontologists Jonathan Batt and Jason Kidd to look at the find. Most fossils of plants or animals are found either in temperate climates or in isolated niches in the tropics, such as the desert, or high altitudes where there is wind blows away sand and stone to reveal other ancient remains. The fossils lie buried and inaccessible under millions of tons of soil and vegetation. Over 18 years of searching, the researchers collected more than 2,000 plant samples from several different mines, all Rihanna, and instead of an ancient forest filled with unfamiliar species of plants and trees, they, on the contrary, discovered the distant ancestors of modern flora, albeit not as diverse as today: coconut and banana and legumes. It was quite obvious that Stilicho hides a lot of interesting things in its depths. In 2007, for the first time, they discovered a strange and very large one. A vertebra that was originally attributed to a crocodile, but now after a detailed examination it was undoubtedly a fragment of a snake similar to a modern anaconda, only the dimensions were several times larger. Having collected all the found samples of vertebrae, and there were about 100 of them from 36 different species of reptiles, scientists eventually selected 2 species from them and focused on their vertebrae. The creature had a T-shaped spine, and the bones had a number of characteristics that resembled modern boa constrictors. Today, boa constrictors are common anacondas, widely common in South America. One reaches a length of up to 4.5 meters with a weight of about 45 kilograms, but anacondas can exceed 6 meters in length and weigh more than 200 kilograms. Remains change. Rihanna assumed that the ancient reptile was closely related to boa constrictors but led a lifestyle more similar to the modern anaconda, an aquatic inhabitant that feels comfortable both in rivers and in swamps. Anacondas are very large, but this ancient one, the serpent, was much more useful. How to find out from the remains how big prehistoric animals are? You often ask this question in the comments. In particular, the problem with determining the size of ancient snakes is that they never find the entire spine in such a neatly formulated row. Usually they find individual bones, maybe even pairs, and if individual vertebrae are not placed in the correct position along the spine, the length of the animal will never be known. Having developed coordinates for individual vertebrae, paleontologists used a computer model to place them in the correct position of the spine and determine the length of the animal found. The first results were published in a major journal in early 2009. There were first announced measures of Titanoboa 14.7 meters in length and weighing about 1,100 kilograms of titanium. Combat was as long as a modern intercity bus and weighed as much as 2 adult bulls, but that's where all the information ended. As I already said, they needed a skull when this amazing find ended up in their hands, and yes, they began to compare the contours of individual bones of ancient reptiles with the perfectly preserved modern skulls of an anaconda, boa constrictor, and a python maxillofacially. The guest testified to that the mouth of the Titanoboa's entire head reached no more than 60 centimeters, which is not so much in comparison with the whole body, the hinge bone connecting the skull, the lower jaw allowed the mouth to open wide. The teeth on the jaws of the giant snake were more densely packed than those of modern boa constrictors. The more teeth, the easier it is to grab the slippery scaly fish. Of course, looking at these gigantic sizes and mass, you might think that the snake was lazy and just sat at the bottom of the reservoir and grabbed a fish that was about to learn to be careful swam by, but it was not at all like that. It ate like fish. Both crocodiles and turtles' titanium was not poisonous, but instead it crushed its prey with a compression force equivalent to a pressure of more than 6,000 tons. After the extinction of dinosaurs, titanium beetle was the largest predator on the surface of our planet for at least 10 million years. It was the ruler of the earth, the top of the food chain. The size of the snake immediately raised the question of how it became so large. Titanoboa was a cold-blooded animal, and body temperature depended on the habitat. Reptiles can grow in warmer conditions, a climate where they can absorb enough energy to maintain the required level of metabolism. Is why insects, reptiles and amphibians tend to be more abundant in the tropics than in the temperate zone. From this point of view, the extraordinary heat is what made the snake a titanium. The relationship between body weight when cold and ambient temperature was the subject of a study conducted in 2005 by researchers from the Institute of Nuclear Physics in St. Petersburg, examining the sizes of animal species at different. Anastasia Makarova calculated the ambient temperatures as much as possible. Use fossils to estimate temperatures in the distant past. The flea heads used Russian data as well as information about modern anacondas and their Amazon habitat to conclude that Titanoboa required warm temperatures to survive in the forests. In those early days it was very muggy. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were 50% higher than today, which led to high temperatures on land. Temperature influences how species survived in the tropics and how they will survive climate change quickly. And pollution of the Earth's atmosphere. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide cause global warming, a phenomenon that if left unchecked can lead to mass extinction of species that cannot cope with the heat. When the temperature rises at some point, plants must become incapable of proper photosynthesis. When a plant cannot release heat, it dies. But biology is an amazing thing. It can adapt to almost any conditions. Climate change, changing continents, all this is the fuel of evolution, and it is likely that many plants are already ready for. Does this mean for new changes that Titanoboa may someday return as the temperature rises? Such a possibility exists, but it will take time. It may take 1,000,000 years, maybe a little less, but the main surprise is that in the future Titanoboa may return. The truth is, there is one thing, but evolution takes millions of years. But what will be the consequences of a sudden change in temperature? What's happening now? No one knows yet. Don't forget to put your finger up under this video and click on the bell so you don't miss anything else on our channel. Subscribe who is not with us yet. And before new interesting meetings, there was a time on Earth when it was surrounded by just a few very small continents, and there was one supercontinent. It didn't have the usual chains of mountains or beautiful forest landscapes on it at that distant time. It was a rocky wasteland consisting of lifeless rocks and stones and sedimentary rocks. There could be no talk of any life here, but in the ocean waters at that time there was a completely different picture where things were with the animal world. Things were much more interesting. This is how the Earth looked about 600 million years ago. This ancient period of the history of our planet is called Ideocharic or Ventian. For the origin of life, seawater is more hospitable than the dry soil of land in Odio-Curry, and the level of oxygen in the atmosphere was still too low, so the existence of organisms outside of water was impossible. The water, in turn, protected the cells from harsh sunlight, moistened the thin walls of the cells, and, thanks to their high density, supported them well. Scientists say that some primitive bacteria lived in our oceans 3.8 billion years ago. They absorbed the energy of the sun and released oxygen through photosynthesis, but almost all of the resulting oxygen was absorbed by dissolved iron and precipitated in the form of iron-containing minerals. This process continued in ocean waters for about 1 billion years, after which the level of oxygen in the atmosphere finally increased during the Vienna period. The oxygen content in the air increased from 0.2 to 17%. Today, oxygen makes up almost 21% of the Earth's atmosphere. In the Viennese period, complex multicellular life arose and took on various forms in the ocean depths. In this period, long before the famous Cambrian explosion, the first animal appeared on our planet: music. In the mid-20th century, paleontologists found the imprint of an ancient creature before the Cambrian period. They named him Dickinson. For a long time, this find remained a mystery to scientists. They could not fully understand whether it was an animal, a fungus, a lichen, or another long-extinct form of life that left no descendants. The skeletons of the creatures that inhabited the oceans of that time, of course, were not preserved, and the point here is not so much the time as the fact that the animals themselves simply did not have any skeletons at that time, although time also plays a significant role. 500 million years have passed, so scientists today get all the information from prints, but if you think that prints cannot tell a lot of such creatures, then you are mistaken. Dickinson is not a representative of fossil organisms of the idea of the Carabiota, the name given to the period in the history of the Earth that preceded the Cambrian explosion, and it is also such a soft cake, a flat disc up to 60 in length centimeters at that time. It was one of the largest creatures. Dickinson's body is not divided into segments and is symmetrical relative to the midline. Thanks to these divisions, Dickinson, I resemble a feather or a palm branch. So what is this plant, or is it an animal? In 2018, an international team of scientists from Australia, Germany and Russia conducted a study that revealed the secret. They studied the composition of organic films in the prints of two representatives. About articulate Dickinson, her and Andy, you made an amazing discovery, and it so amazed the scientific world that it immediately became known as the Holy Grail of paleontology. Fossils were found in a rock on the shores of the White Sea in the northwestern part of Russia in the conditions of the far north. They were well preserved and did not lose information that could be erased in warmer climes. The representative of Australia is Russian. Origin geologist Ilya Bobrovsky studied these fossils in detail and discovered that a certain film was preserved on the ancient Dickensians. They removed it from the rock, dissolved it, and used gas chromatography and mass spectrometry to find the preserved organic molecules. As the analysis showed, the level of cholesterol in the Dickinson fossils ranged from 85 to 93%. This almost 100% share of cholesterol in the fossils suggests that she Dickinson I was the oldest and one of the first animals on Earth. The fact is that cholesterol is produced by bacteria in the intestines, and this is characteristic of animals because plants or fungi simply cannot produce it. What's also intriguing about Dickinson is that it was one of the earliest known organisms that could move. It turns out that the first animals appeared long before the so-called Cambrian explosion, which happened about 540 million years ago. Living creatures then suddenly multiplied. Dickens. They appeared much earlier, at least 20 million years by the way to this day. Only the Kimbrel was confidently attributed to the animal kingdom of those years. Despite this amazing news, there are still many questions such as how these creatures behaved. Maybe they swayed on the sea surface and fed on cyanobacteria, but how did they do it? Did they have a mouth and a digestive tract, or did they absorb nutrients with their skin? Did they have a transparent appearance, or did they have coloring? As we see, there are a lot of questions, but the search for answers continues with even more cool videos ahead on the channel. This is interesting, so as not to do anything. Click on the bell under this video until new interesting meetings. Music, Tyrannosaurus, the first warrior on Earth, majestic and formidable, its huge dimensions, powerful jaws, sharp teeth. All this instills fear and horror at the thought that such a death machine roamed the Earth in the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. Music. But was it really so? Because no one has seen tyrannosaurs alive with their own eyes. Scientists are dealing with reconstructions of appearance and image life. This predator, which is only very approximate, so perhaps paleontologists are exaggerating somewhat. By the way, let's get ahead a little. In 2017, scientists from Texas played a little with the sound and were able to recreate the growl of a Tyrannosaurus. It is noted that most likely he made this sound without opening his mouth. The low-frequency sound helped the Tyrannosaurus communicate at a distance, so it was more like a moo than a roar. You can listen and evaluate this sound at the end of the video, but for now, as it were, there, no matter how it was and no matter how they exaggerated and invented it, that's all. Equally, T. Rex is the most charismatic predator of all time and certainly deserves attention. T. Rex lived in the western part of North America. This continent, known to everyone today, in those distant times was the island of Lara Mussel. Today, based on the largest complete skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus that has been found, one can determine its size and mass. T. Rex was more than 12 meters long, about 4 meters high, and its weight during life reached approximately 9.5 tons, although this point is controversial because claims that its mass even reached 12 tons, it was one of the largest land predatory lizards that ever existed on our planet. For some time there were disputes about whether this dinosaur had feathers or not. Hundreds of T. Rex remains fell throughout North America. Not a single ounce of plumage was discovered. but in 2004 are primitive. T. Rex Edo was covered with feathers similar to those that other small ones had carnivorous dinosaurs. This was followed by the discovery of Tyrannus in 2012. This giant predator was closely related to T. Rex, and not only some of the sizes it was covered with long feathers. However, in the larger T. Rex, they found fossilized scales, and scientists came to the conclusion that if there were feathers, they decreased with age, and moreover, this could be influenced by the climate. The latest study showed that representatives of this group still did not have feathers or had them, but their number was minimal. No doubt whether there were feathers or not, this is not the most important advantage of the T. Rex. Its other characteristics attract much more attention. For example, keeping in mind its dimensions and remembering the film Jurassic Park, the question arises of how fast the Tyrannosaurus was. Some scientists believe that the lizard was very fast and could even move at a speed of 40 to 70 kilometers per hour, and at first it was assumed that it did not run, but jumped like a kangaroo using its long tail as a balancer. But others believe that it was a poor runner of some 11 meters per second in 2017. This dispute was finally put to rest with the help of a computer program. Scientists were able to calculate the maximum speed of a Tyrannosaurus. The researchers proceeded from the fact that the reptile ran with its body stretched out horizontally, using its tail as a counterweight, taking into account mainly the size and average mass of the animal. The king of all dinosaurs of the Cretaceous period, the Tyrannosaurus moved only pi 0.2 meters per second. The authors of the study established a clear relationship between the weight of the predator's body and the speed of its movement, from which a completely expected conclusion followed. The smaller the dinosaur was, the faster it ran, and vice versa. It turns out that it was still possible to easily escape from an adult Tyrannosaurus, but it was hardly possible to hide for a long time. The Tyrannosaurus had a very acute sense of smell, more acute than that of a dog, and it could smell the blood from several kilometers away thanks to the pads of its paws. The Tyrannosaurus felt the slightest vibration of the earth. Sound waves were transmitted through the pads to the paws and then up the skeleton in this way. The Tyrannosaurus felt what was happening around him. This lizard had highly developed binocular vision, with the visual acuity of tyrannosaurs being 13 times higher than that of humans and almost 10 times the visual acuity of an eagle. Tyrannosaurs could recognize objects located at a distance of 6 kilometers. Such equipment and an arsenal of deadly weapons could be the envy of any type of predator. It is difficult to imagine that the T. Rex had competitors and especially enemies. However, paleontologists found the remains of lizards that speak of that he was killed by another animal. The bones of the found Tyrannosaurus were crushed by the jaws of another powerful predator dinosaur. By the way, the jaws of the T. Rex itself opened to a maximum of 1.5 meters. The Tyrannosaurus bit its victim with a force of about 3.6 tons, and this is twice the bite force of the modern champion crocodile. At the same time, the long conical teeth of the dinosaurs exerted enormous pressure on the bones of the victims, reaching 30 tons per square centimeter. It's scary to imagine the power of such a thing, even if this predator could easily bite a Mini Cooper in half. And at that time such monstrous power allowed the Tyrannosaurus to trumpet the large bones of other dinosaurs like seeds and also produce a whole series of deep fractures in the bones due to which the latter simply exploded. So maybe that T. Rex whose remains were found by paleontologists was killed by another Tyrannosaurus. Initially it was believed that the Tyrannosaurus was a lone ruthless predator, but over time facts accumulated which they say that these dinosaurs hunted in packs. Very often the remains of tyrannosaurs are found together. Such a massive death of animals is possible if they hunt in a pack and, in pursuit of prey, one after another they fall into a trap, for example, a bog, a swamp, a mud spring, quicksand. For example, in Canada in 1910, in one place, 9 tyrannosaurs were discovered at once. Lizards in this dead flock were from 4 to 9 meters in length, which indicates the different ages of the animals. Another interesting feature of the Tyrannosaurus, judging by the structure of the pelvic bones and the number of chevrons on the tail, the females were larger than the males, like crocodiles or some birds of prey, and like all modern animals that hunt and live in packs, the tyrannosaurs fought for leadership, divided the females and the territory. It is possible that these dinosaurs even ate their relatives, but they were still their main prey. Herbivorous dinosaurs, at least that's what some paleontologists think. But there are others who claim that the T.Rex was actually not such a terrible and ruthless predator back in 1917. The Canadian paleontologist Lawrence Lamp called it a land vulture, that is, eating. Of course, it's hard to believe that this embodiment of unbridled rage, the image that was created in the movies, actually fed on the souls of dead dinosaurs by American scientists who studied the remains, came to the conclusion that the massive multi-ton body hardly allowed the Tyrannosaurus to pursue prey. Such conclusions are based on the results of a computed tomography study of the lizard's vertebrae, which suggests that the Tyrannosaurus had limitations in movement and its body was not adapted for various maneuvers and sharp turns, although studies of its fossilized remains do not give a definite answer to the method of obtaining food. Today, most scientists are sure that T.Rex was still a predator, and enough evidence was found for this. Maybe the size of the T.Rex did not allow the T.Rex to pursue the fleeing dinosaurs, but being an excellent hunter, it could overtake the prey with one jerk. Besides having binocular vision, it could accurately estimate the distance and probably attack the victim from an ambush. Most likely, it more often attacked young or old and weakened dinosaurs than adults and full of strength, because some are herbivores. Dinosaurs such as Triceratops, for example, could give him a serious rebuff. Groups of dinosaurs were able to defend themselves especially well in favor of the predator, they say, and a large number of Tyrannosaurus teeth were noted that were found on the bones of herbivorous dinosaurs. But there is also a third neutral option. The Tyrannosaurus was a hunter, but could also bite dead dinosaurs, and especially do not forget about strength and power. No one could stop Erickson from squeezing prey from other predators. However, if he really was a predator, he was a hunter who did not know defeat. If after a collision with a T.Rex the victim, although wounded, was still lucky and managed to escape, rest assured she still did not have long to live. The fact is that between the teeth of the Tyrannosaurus there are large gaps. Feeding on the flesh, the pieces got stuck in the cracks in the front one. Over time, turned the oral cavity into another weapon of the T.Rex, biting the victim. It was infected with poisons of humus. Its breath clearly does not have the best smell. Such advantages as a sense of smell, a highly developed vision of the jaw, all this leaves no chance of survival in the fight against such monsters with such a set. It is not so easy to hide from a lizard, even taking into account its slow movement, but this is on land. But what about water? It turned out that a T.Rex could swim, and even how at the bottom of a dry reservoir paleontologists discovered traces of this huge dinosaur. Having studied it, it turned out that the river had about 3 meters of depth, and compared the available information, scientists recreated a computer model of the dinosaur swimming. If you believe the footprints of the shooting range, it was kept in the water almost vertically and like a float. This position helped it fight against the current and provided more opportunities for maneuvers. And by the way, one step of the dinosaur was approximately 3.3 meters. Nowadays, the thought of a real Jurassic Park did not allow some to sleep peacefully. Scientists have long been talking that humanity can and even has the ability to clone dinosaurs, but in reality everything turned out to be not so rosy. A team of experts from Manchester analyzed traces of collagen in the remains of a Tyrannosaurus to find out whether this substance can really be used for cloning. It turned out that the isolated collagen corresponds to collagen in ostriches and used this organic material. It makes no sense that the absence of the necessary biological molecules in the bones of dinosaurs makes it impossible to resurrect dinosaurs using modern methods. For this you need full-fledged genetic material, the chances of discovering which, given the millions of years that have passed since the death of the dinosaurs, are practically zero. But judging by what a monster and ruthless killer the Tyrannosaurus was, this is for the best, although on the other hand there will always be advantages. The truth is what you think.